coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
That being said, I have been engaged with people who have just been interesting people with thoughtful things to say, who later we did business together. Now, and if they pre-cogitated that was going to be their approach, which on some of these people I think they did, and credit to them, in a way I don't even mind. In a way, that gives me confidence about their capacities in what they're offering.
Hello Sales Nation, I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman Podcast, and welcome to today's show. On today's show we have Dylan Baskind, and we're diving into Dylan's world essentially of how people pitch him all the time, what he responds to from sales professionals. Hint, cold calling, he does not respond well to, but he does respond to emails. We talk about demos, the structure, and essentially how to pitch a CEO. Dylan is the CEO of Qwilr, which you can find out more about Qwilr.com, which is QWILR.com. Full disclosure, Qwilr is, as of tomorrow, I think, a sponsor of the podcast. Dylan would have come on either way. That's kind of irrelevant to this episode, and there's a lot of value in here for anyone who is pitching the C-suite. But I just want to tell you that they are sponsoring the show kind of onwards and upwards from here. So with all that said, and with full disclosure out there, let's jump into today's episode. Hi Dylan, and welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
Hello Will, thanks for having me.
You're more welcome, sir. So you are the CEO of a hot up-and-coming tech startup. You are the prime candidate for a lot of the audience to pitch whether it's SaaS products, and there's a whole bunch. There's probably more to this than what I think there is outside looking in, not being the CEO of a cool startup. And so what I want to do today is kind of work out what, if any, emails, calls, networking, pitches that you respond to, what you bought from, if any, and then I want to suss out, yes or no with that, how we could reverse engineer the perfect cold email, if that's something that you would ever respond to. And so essentially give our audience a bit of an insight from the other way around, rather than our sales managers saying, hey, you should do these are the best practices. This is what Forrester have suggested that people open, and get really personal with it and just see what gets opened in your inbox. So I guess the place to start with all this, and you kind of alluded to it when before we hit record, but what percentage, if any, of cold emails and cold calls do you actually respond to from a B2B salesperson?
Very, very few is the short answer. Look, I mean, to be honest, the funny thing is, and we've experimented with cold outbound emails ourselves, so we've been on both sides of this equation. I generally will read most cold emails, which is on the other side of the fence. I never thought that was the case, but I do. When I get these emails, I give them a read. I see what's in them. I respond to very, very few. And I think I respond, the few that I've sort of clicked on the links and explored have been the very classic cliche advice, which is, actually research who you're speaking to. Say something legitimately relevant. Not like, and you get so many, hi Dylan, I read your blog on so-and-so. Here is a sentence from it. It was great. Pitch. Which is, yes, following the advice, but not really following. Now, they haven't actually engaged with anything I've said or about our business or their service. The few that I will actually explore are ones that have, hey, I checked out your blog and you said this, that's interesting. We're doing this in our business and that relates in this, legitimate way. And I'm like, yeah, this seems like a person who is thoughtful and engaged, and we can be peers. So what are you talking about? I'll go check it out. Mm-hmm. That represents about 4% of the cold emails I get. 50% are terrible. 50% are like, hello, grand sir. Have you found my amazing web shop? A bunch of stuff. So that's just immediate delete. And then the ones that actually, I'll actually probably go a bit further with, have prepared material that is relevant to my business. So it's not just like, hey, Dylan, I read your blog post, blah, 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 or I've checked out your website and it's interesting. We do so-and-so. So I understand the broad context of how what they're describing to me relates to my business. But they send me something that says, here is an actual breakdown of, how our service X maps to your business Y. Specifically, you do this, we do this, you do this, we do this. And that gets me close to being like, okay, if this is legitimate, this could maybe work. Maybe I'll explore it. But I respond to very, very few, perhaps because most of the emails I receive are nothing like that.
And
yeah,
let's
that's
just
been my experience.
before we'll come on to emails again in a second, but just to just probably take it off the table. Do you respond well to cold calls?
Oh, hell no.
Okay, well, we'll forget about that then for the second. we won't come back to that because clearly 99% of the time, and B2B more specifically, cold calling is a waste of time. I think it's cliche to say it at this point. I still think that there's too many people doing it, and cold emailing as well. I think you just described the difference between perhaps three stages of cold emails. One is just the spam from Nigeria, which is, it shouldn't be in the inbox. It should be filtered out before that point because clearly it's going to 20,000 people, all the same email. I don't know why Google still allows them to come through. Then you've got the next kind of level, which is the mildly customized, which is, I've got to be in my bonnet about this, Dylan. I think salespeople are totally wasted and their time is wasted, their expertise is wasted by using sales automation and email automation to spam out emails like this, which, as you described of, hey, I read a blog, one line, and then the rest is copy and pasted automatically and sent to perhaps not 10,000, but perhaps sent to 100 or 200 people.
Sure.
Clearly, there's a real opportunity then for, and you've touched on it there, of a more customized email. But even then, what you described was, here's our features, benefits, and how they fit with you. So it's still not very sophisticated. And are you aware of, because I don't want to sound patronizing by telling you otherwise, but are you aware of what social selling is and kind of warming up emails on social beforehand?
Yeah, but I tell you what, not well. Why don't you tell me a bit about it?
Okay, so just very briefly, so if I was to pitch you on something, I'd be more inclined, rather than just send you a random email, I'd be following you on Twitter, I'd be sharing stuff, I'd be writing about your band, I'd be doing other things to get my name, even if it's just deep within your subconscious, so that you feel a little bit of something when you see my name in the email versus a completely cold email. It takes very little time, very little effort, and I think you get pretty little out of it versus a real true engagement and a real conversation on social before you try and pitch. But the reason I ask you is, have you experienced this either, consciously or subconsciously? And
yes.
and how does that affect you when you go to open an email when you've seen that name before?
It's almost the exact. In fact, it is the exact same principle applies. I've had people engage with me in an incredibly flimsy way, an incredibly transparent way, and it's just there is no doubt in my mind what is happening. And it essentially, because they always say the best salesmen, those most consummate salesmen, you just do not know you are being sold to. You are just having this warm, fun, engaging conversation that leads to a certain trajectory. That being said, I have been engaged with people who have just been interesting people with thoughtful things to say, who later we did business together. Now, and if they, pre-cogitated that was going to be their approach, which on some of these people I think they did, and credit to them. In a way, I don't even mind. In a way, that gives me confidence about their capacities in what they're offering. Like, if they can engage at this level, I feel that there's a certain amount of trust that has been built between us, that I know that as an intellect, this is who I'm dealing with. So I'm all for social selling. I think the principle and what matters is to engage at a serious level. Don't engage at as you say, the minor customization, the minor amount of thoughtfulness you've put into actually communicating with this person.
So what's the difference between a flimsy social media conversation versus, to use your words, a serious one?
I think it's one that has original content. One that says something to that you say, it's not like you have some comment of really some feature and someone says, great feature, this is cool. Or someone says hey, this is interesting. Have you seen this other app completely not mentioned anywhere? You've never mentioned it before. It's similar. Or did you take inspiration from so-and-so? Or, hey, how are you guys thinking about blah-de-blah? That's like an original, it's original conversation. It's not just sycophancy. It's not just thumbs up, or repeating something that's been said elsewhere very, very clearly. It's about bringing original content original content of the conversation, I think.
And without putting words in your mouth, tell me if I'm right or wrong with this, but having original content, does that show and demonstrate that you have knowledge of the industry? And is that where the trust comes from versus someone who's just share, nice, and spamming stuff on Instagram?
I tell you what, I will happily take those words and repeat them in that. Yes, no, I think you're quite right. I think it demonstrates to the person you're communicating with that you have internalized their industry. You do have a genuine understanding because you're not just parroting what they're saying. You're bringing new thoughts, and because you're bringing new thoughts, you have to bring it with knowledge of the industry, with knowledge of their business, the commercial landscape in which they sit, the marketplace in which they sit. Yeah, and that means, okay, this is someone I can engage with if their commentary is at that level. And if it's not, you'll be like, oh, geez, block.
Yeah, so this leads me on to a deeper conversation about, and we'll come back to how to reverse engineer, how to pitch Dylan in a second. But let's bring you on to a wider conversation of something I'm pitching to salespeople listening to the show. The 10, 20,000 people that listen to the show, they're sick of hearing me say it. And it seems like a no-brainer. Let me prerequisite the question with that. But surely it's a massive value add to you to be dealing with someone who isn't just this kind of old school closer salesperson who's just hustle and is all just trying to follow up. How much of an advantage in the marketplace when, for you as a CEO, if you were hiring salespeople, is it to be speaking and dealing with those salespeople? They don't have to be older, they don't have to be more senior, but they have that wider business knowledge and that wider business acumen. They know what a profit and loss is. They know how to dive into those kind of documents. How much of a big deal is that for you?
I mean, it's huge. I have both an engineering and a design background, and in the design world, you've got this constant focus on the user in the sense of, okay, we're building this product and it's got these business concerns, but what's the user like? What are they thinking? How are they going to experience this? And it's funny how much that same idea applies directly to sales, because the best salespeople and the guys who work for us that are just like closers for us, they're people that the whole first part of the conversation that they have with these customers is just like, what's your business? Oh, okay, that's interesting. That must be hard on the sales side, blah, blah. They get it. They absorb the nature of this person's business. And importantly, they absorb what are the pressures in their business that make their sales cycles turn. And then they can map it to, well, okay, that's cool. Here's what we do, and see how that helps you there. And that 100% is like this sort of quote unquote user-focused way of selling. And it's so critical. And we've, definitely I've been sold to and, have experienced crappy selling, which is entirely like, just here's the company line. And it's got nothing to, it maps in no way to my topography.
Definitely. And the annoying thing is that does probably work if you can spam out enough of those emails, if you can get enough of those calls. And I think it's Gary Vaynerchuk who said it originally of marketers ruin everything. I think marketers ruin platforms like email by spamming. Then salespeople come along behind them and try and unruin it by customizing one line and still just drilling it into the ground and smashing the platform. So let's come back to the reverse engineering of the pitch to Dylan.
Sure.
So we have this amazing salesperson. They know all about your business. They've got the knowledge of the industry. They've talked to you on social or in person or whatever it is, however they've connected with you. They've sent you an email. Should this first email be blah, 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 here's my product? Or should it be, here's a here's an industry paper of something, the marketing of your industry that you'd find really interesting? That's a really bland example that's off the top of my head, but something perhaps more interesting than that. Or do you prefer them to not beat around the bush, to be kind of clear and upfront about what they're going about here, and for them to talk about the product like in that initial email?
Look, it really depends what you're selling and who you're selling to. However, I think the best emails are, classic advice, short and sharp and to the point. Do not send me a page of content like, there's no way I'm going to read that. Short and sharp to the point. And I think that the email should be an option. I think what I like about a short, sharp email is that it contains a link, like it should contain a link that goes somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
It has not in a link necessarily, an action, something that you can optionally take if you are interested. Not like, here is everything you could possibly need to know about my proposition, and if it's not all in this email, it won't close. It's more like, hey, engaging comment. If you're interested, check this out. And I think that link should really contain, I mean, again, this is coming from a design perspective, but I think it matters for sales, is this kind of sales experience. Not like, hey, not like the document you link to is like, here's our pricing and, annual upfront kind of thing. It should be this, a video of what you offer, or here's an animation, or here are some charts. And the thing I love in these experiences is a data-driven sort of success story, again, related to your business. So someone has, here's a case study we've done. We implemented product or service X, whatever you sell, obviously directly industry relevant or market relevant to you. Pre-implementation, important KPI A was here. Post-implementation, important KPI was like way up here. And then you get, the other thing I really love about these kind of pitches is that you get like a nice collaborative story. So in the sense of, it's not just like this bland data and assume that it was all us. It's more like, here is the story of how product or service X was implemented, and here's how it evolved, because that gives some legitimacy and reality to implementing that product or service into the business.
Why? So you mentioned two words then. Follow up on that, Dylan. Tell us a little bit more what's going on in your brain when you see a story versus you see a sales pitch, and at the bottom it says, we increased revenue by 20%.
Sure. And this is coming back to, I guess, the sort of like the designer in me, who is also the running and growing a company. I think the story does two things. The story notion, or rather the storytelling way of selling. First of all, it deals with the animal psyche who is excited about the idea of transforming a pain point in their business. I am such a victim of this. I'm so good to sell to in some ways because I'm a technologist. So I love seeing new technology in a demo format, in an experiential way, a quick video or a quick animation. And I don't know all the exact specifics of how this maps to my business, but I've got the gorilla in me is like, ooh, yes. Okay, I can see how this is going to solve that really painful thing in my business. This could be meaningful. And then you get into that data-driven bit, and I'm like, okay, wow, if that had that impact on our business, look at them. What if they did that for us? The second thing I think it does is it helps remove some of the, people no one wants to be sold to. That's the thing. No one wants to know they're being sold to. As I said, great salesmen, they just talk. You're just having a discussion. The storytelling mode, it's the perfect wolf in sheep's clothing, because you're telling the story, you're exciting their animal instinct about this pain point in their business, and it just happens to them. This story just washes over them, but they're aware of the value that is being delivered, and they can map it back to themselves. There is also a natural human desire to identify with the quote-unquote heroes of the story. So I think it's an incredibly, I don't want to say it, but it's insidious. It's a fantastically insidious way to sell.
I'm really intrigued as to something you said there, which is probably not relevant to the conversation, but it really intrigues me and it might be the difference why you're CEO and why I am a podcast host, in that you described that part of your brain as the gorilla part of your brain. Whereas for me, I would definitely describe it as the chimp part of my brain that is kind of going, oh, I could do this. And it's kind of like this cheeky thing running around, ruining all the discipline that like other parts of my brain are trying to put in place. But I totally get it. And by telling a story, you're painting a picture, and you're also taking some of the pressure off your reputation as a salesperson and putting it on whoever had the success as well, which is awesome. And we've talked about it with G McNaughton. He came on the show and literally just rammed case studies down my throat for an hour. He used to work with Tony Robbins. He's now a consultant, super successful. And he just literally said, case studies, stories are the solution to most sales problems. So we'll link to that episode in the show notes over at salesman.red this episode's show notes. And moving on from this then, this is something that goes, and you may be aware of this, the experimentation that's going on out of Silicon Valley with a lot of the big tech startups of because you mentioned demos then. A lot of them are moving away from demos, and I'll tell you what the theory is, and you can tell me whether this would resonate with you as a CEO at being pitched as opposed to what you would do
Sure.
with your company. But they're moving away with demos because they were finding that they were doing demos with the person who has the purse strings, who isn't the end user. They didn't really give a crap about the demo itself, but it was just part of a process. It seems logical that if you're going to spend money on something, you want to demo it first. And they found a higher success rate and a high close rate of not doing the demo, not having more opportunities to screw up, and then the message comes down from the top of, we're using this, go at it, versus, hey, what do you guys think about this? And then you're bringing up more discussion. So again, putting perhaps the what you would do in your company aside, do you, as a CEO, expect a demo? Would that put you off if someone tried to sell you without you physically trying it? Or are you just too busy to play around with demos? And would you try and pass this on to someone perhaps who isn't a decision maker further down the food chain at your company? And then obviously then it adds to time and complexity in the sales process itself.
Yeah, in a funny way, although we do demos, we don't cold demos. So I'll come. I know this is talking in my frame, but I'll explain why. I think that I definitely don't have time for demos in a cold way. If someone says, "Hey, Dylan, you should check out it," or "Do you want to have a demo?" My day is there's so much going on. I definitely don't have time for demos. That being said, what I do want is one of my juniors or one of the guys who works for me to get a demo and to think that it's either fantastic and we should use it. I think the land and expand idea is a good one. As in, what I want to know is, of course, is this going to make my business better, more efficient? Are we going to save money? Are we going to be able to grow? And I don't really want a demo to tell me that. What I do want is one of my juniors to have used it, experienced it, and can tell me, yes, I can say with much more certainty now that we should be doing it. So I think that demos in a cold outbound way are a bad idea, 100%. However, warm inbound, probably as in, I'm not going to say I would like a demo. One of my juniors will probably be interested and go check it out. Then I think it is very effective. So I think outbound cold demo, definitely I would read the email. No way I'm going to book a demo.
But then, okay, let me jump in here. Would you then say, hey, this sounds interesting, can someone else do the demo? Or would you just instinctively just go, well, they've not made the efforts, they've not understood my time, they've not been respectful of my time, binned?
Demo is at our company, and I think really ought to be mid-funnel. There's no way demo should be hey, you've never heard of us? How about a demo? As in, there's so much investment, and it's true. We know this through because demos are actually incredibly successful for us. Mm-hmm. But you don't start with a demo. Someone has to. You say it's there if you want it. Why don't we explore a bit? And after a while, once they've warmed up to us already, hey, okay, why don't you give me a demo? There's just so much obligation. So much, people are busy. They don't want to commit to half an hour of time, and.
Okay, from that then, would you say if you got a demo pitch mid-funnel, you got one of your team on it, is that a huge buying signal for anyone trying to sell to you that there's something here that you're willing to commit that time, that effort to it?
So I'm only going to speak personally, just as someone who runs a company. Yes, if I was at the point where I was like, let's go get a demo from these guys, the time expenditure should be okay. Obviously, I think everyone values time very highly, but the time expenditure for me, when I look at our company, to go and get a demo, I'd be like, I'm very seriously thinking about doing this. So show me what you guys can do.
Nice. Okay, and moving on from this, and I'm conscious of time here, Dylan, how do we close you? How does this process happen? Is this, again, because I'm conscious that you're a busy guy, you've got lots of incoming email, you've got your own business stuff, you've got internal stuff going on, you've got fires to put out internally, as every company does. How often should we follow up? Should we chase you a little bit? Do you appreciate that, or is that a turn off? How do we go about, once we've done the demo, you go, it's pretty good this. How do you go from it's pretty good this to let's do it?
Let's do it. Look, I think for one thing, I hate constant follow up personally. Once a week, if I haven't responded, once a week is a decent clip. I'd probably start getting a bit pissed off if someone's messaging me more than once a week. I think the way to close deals is again to try and hit people at all the levels of their psyche at once. In terms of, if your proposition is, it's hitting me in the exciting part, it's, it looks fantastic. There is a sort of exciting ape and chimp attracting component. The data is there in terms of like, you've got a series of successful implementations that have had this effect. And I mean, a really great thing that we do, and I think it's effective, is, look, here's the as advertised price. End of financial year. Mm-hmm. Why don't we get this done now, and we can give it to you for 50% off first 3 months. I understand what's happening to me. I understand the psychological mechanisms that are at play, but the fact is, it's 50% off for 3 months. Like, all right, let's do it. So in that way, I think once you're actually making an offer in terms of discount or what have you, it doesn't matter if you're transparent, because the reality of the value is there. So I think as long as you were to hit me on I'm excited about the product, I can see the actual hard data if I want to look at the numbers and how it's implemented. And yeah, if I'm not responding, you reach out to me once a week. And if at that point I'm not responding to you, you should probably ask me, is there something about this offer, the product, the service that is not meeting your expectations or not what you wanted? Because we've closed a lot of customers by saying, we didn't hear from you, blah, blah, blah. Is there anything, is there something specific? And they're like, yeah, it's this. We're like, okay, we put them on a list. When we're ready, we go back to them. And a lot of customers have closed that way. And had we just left it, we would have lost them. Yeah.
And how should we then follow if you say that the deal doesn't close? It could be, say there's just no budget right now for whatever reason. How should we follow up with you in 6 months' time, 12 months' time? Should we jump straight back into the conversation? And I think this is a leading question. I think I know where you're going with this, but okay. But I'm not convinced, which is why I'm asking it. I'm not 100%. Or should we then almost restart the process for two fronts? One, you'll have probably forgotten who we are, and two, that the trust, the rapport that's been built obviously dies down a little bit over time. Should we? Okay, it's a better question. If you're not going to close, should we follow up sequentially with added value, whether it be reports, whether it be something that is useful for you, or would that be a turn off? And should we come back when our product perhaps solves that problem that you wanted? Should we come back at that point specifically?
Yeah, I think don't just try and keep up this sort of endless stream of newsletters. That's annoying, and I will and people I think will unsubscribe. What I think is the ideal way to re-engage with someone, this is certainly how we approach it, is, hey, that priority pressure point that we discussed earlier, how's that going? Blah, blah, blah. Ideally, some useful thought about that. I've noticed this company just got acquired. How does that impact you? So you haven't heard from me from 6 months, but we remember you and we understand your business at a real level. You can engage with us. And then you can ask, like, how's the business evolved since then? Because it's definitely evolved. Like, they've got new pressures and new concerns, and ideally that maps to your product or service. And I think that's the best way to re-engage, because people who run businesses love to talk about their business, and it's top of mind. Mm-hmm. But you re-engage with them by saying, like, I remember, we can talk because I remember you, and here's a real insight into your business that we discussed. And can you talk to me about how it shifted at all? Because that, again, I think that comes back to the idea of engaging with someone at a legitimate level rather than just like a plain old, just 1950s salesman sort of level.
Definitely. Well, it's how. So I think you can sum up most of our conversation which is good. And you've said a couple of counterintuitive things as well, which has made me think. But I think you sum up most of the conversation as you just very simply sell as you want to be sold to. It's as simple as that. If you can add value, if you can be polite, if you can not waste the other person's time, it's almost as simple as that, isn't it?
I think it is. And the other thing I think that's important about selling is, hitting those different levels, as in the way you present needs to look fantastic. It can't just be dry. You need to have a little bit about excitement, a little bit of juice. It needs to have hard numbers. You cannot sell with juice alone. It needs to have hard numbers. And it needs to be, and you need to hit those two things in a relevant way to what is the current painful thing that's going on for you. And be thoughtful.
And we'll come on to Qwilr in a minute, but is the aesthetics of things like I assume the answer is a huge yes, but is there aesthetics of things like quotes, email, even just the aesthetics of an email when you're looking at it? There's structures and ways to make it look prettier and more clickable. Obviously, you're a design nut. I think we can take that away from this conversation. And you're a creative guy with the music and the band that you're in and all that. But does that translate to everybody, even if they're not conscious of it?
Well, yeah, and conscious is exactly the word I would use. I think there is so much subliminal signaling that happens. There's a great book, is that Daniel Kahneman book, Thinking Fast and Slow.
Mm-hmm.
There's just so much information that we have decided upon, biases that we have decided upon in the first half second. Before we're even consciously aware of it, there is so much you've assumed about the professionalism of whom you're dealing with, about the scope of their company, about the level to which they'll execute what they're saying they'll execute. And all of that is contained in the sort of background of how well is the letter spacing done? What's the font like? How are the colors? How unified is it? And look, I can't point you to a scientific study, but I think that there must be one, and if not, there ought to be one, that the same sales content, like identical words, identical proposition, packaged in some super mediocre, PDF's my enemy, but some sort of format, versus some really beautifully laid out, carefully, thoughtfully designed document, and see what the sales differential is. Because I feel very confident that the beautifully designed, thoughtfully laid out one would have a better conversion rate, not at a conscious level. People would not say, I'm doing this deal because I like the font size, but they have a sense that I can trust these people. They seem organized. They seem professional. They seem like the kind of people that can deliver.
Well, you only need to look at emails where there's different fonts in the email where they've copy and pasted stuff.
Copy and paste.
Where it's
terrible.
not black. They've used a blue font for whatever reason. One of the medical device companies I used to sell for, the corporate guidelines was this horrible blue corporate font, and it looked disgusting. And then, I'll end with this. What are your thoughts on smileys within emails? Is that totally unprofessional, or is that okay on occasion?
I would say this is a rule of thumb. Don't smiley on your first communication. But if you want to drop a smiley in on your second or third, that shows me you're a real person. I like that. Nice. I'm a fan of the smiley, but not in your first. In your first, you got to be like, hey, nice to meet you. I'm Dylan. Let's discuss.
Interesting. I think there's a generational difference there as well of who you're pitching, and clearly context is everything. And with that, Dylan, I've got some questions to ask everyone that comes on the show. These are quick fire, but if you feel you need to dive into it deeper, then feel free. First one, which do you prefer? Gun to head, guitar, songwriting, or startups?
Startups. Has to be startups.
Nice. Okay, dollar size if possible. What's the biggest deal you've ever closed?
$250,000.
Nice. Next one. What is one book or resource that you'd recommend to the Salesman Podcast audience?
Probably that Daniel Kahneman book. It's really fascinating about how much information people don't realize that they are assuming.
I've got it. I could literally see it on my bookshelf in front of me.
Okay.
It's something I can recommend. We'll link to the book in the show notes of this episode as well over at salesman.red. Who is the world's greatest salesperson?
Elon Musk. He is like the heroic, engineer, architect, salesman, and just showman. And
I love him.
He's managed it. Yeah. Does it all.
So uncharismatic, such like an average presenter, yet sold or pre-sold, however many millions worth of the latest Tesla that's come out. It's incredible. Without salespeople, he's taking, without dealerships, without anyone actually seeing it. That's how kind of strong his story, as we talked about before, and his messaging is, which is awesome. And final one of these quick fire ones. What does the first 60 minutes of your day look like?
This is actually very specific because I have this very mapped out. It's meditation, sort of like stretching and exercise, email, like anything critical, and then music. There's a bit of music just to sort of like settle me, and then work.
Nice. And I'm just going to reiterate this again for the audience, because when I first started the show, Dylan, I mentioned meditation. I use the Headspace app, or 10 minutes of just mindfulness meditation every morning. It had massive benefits for me. I feel like it has massive benefits for most of the run ragged, kind of type A personality salespeople that are listening to this show. When I first started, every time I mentioned it, I got a bunch of emails saying it's hippie nonsense. Every time, without question, different people as well. Now it's this is almost why that question is in place, because almost every single person that comes on the show has some kind of meditation practice, whether it be actually meditating, whether it be going for a 20-minute, half an hour run with no music or whatever it is. So I appreciate that you said that. Thank you for that. Just strengthens my point, because I'm sick of telling people that it's not hippie, that there's science behind it.
Yeah, but the funny thing is, I think that it's yeah, I mean, there is a philosophical aspect which, if you're interested, you can be involved in. But really, it's just about like a discipline. For me, it seems very similar to the difficulty of sitting down and trying to learn German, like as in the actual mental taxation of like, I've got to control this, must control this, like, subliminal noise. Yeah, it's just as much exercise as anything else, and I think you can go at it a totally absolutely secular way, and I do in an entirely secular way.
Well, for me, as we talked about before, it just quiets that monkey, this little chimp that's in my brain saying, hey, why do you do this this morning? Why do you do this this morning? When this morning I need to edit and release a podcast, and then that's it. Everything else is kind of bonus to that.
Sure.
That's the most focusing thing I can do. Never mind lists, nothing else. Meditation is the thing. 5-10 minutes is perfect. I've got one final question for you, Dylan. So I've asked everyone that comes on the show, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at sales?
Interestingly, I actually think learning to say no, by which I mean this sale is a sunk cost and I should move on to better quality leads. And I think as a young person, there's just this, maybe it's because you don't have enough experience behind you to know that, even though that the local minima and maxima are a bit bumpy, the actual trajectory looks like that. I wish I'd learned to be like, you know what, this is pointless and I should just bail from this and spend my time on finding new leads or working higher quality ones. That took a long time for me to learn, and took me a lot of like, just jump off the cliff kind of, I just need to try it before I really got it. And I wish I had started doing that earlier.
No one's ever said that on the show before. I think that's super powerful. I learned this very early on in medical device sales. I've had one. She was just a bitch. She was just a horrible person, like a theatre manager. And I spent so much time with her, walking her through and it was a tiny sale as well. And, you kind of get excited about these, the beginning of the year, say it was 50 grand, whatever it was. At the end of the year, you're doing, 100,000, 500,000 deals. And I spent so much time with her, and she just did not respect me one bit, pretty much because I was such a sucker and spent so much time with her.
It's a total Pareto principle. I mean, like, there's just such a time drain in these actually quite low value deals and clients and customers and pursuits. I think just being more, just being willing to cut it out, to scalpel it out, is a healthy thing.
Amazing stuff. Well, with that, Dylan, tell us a little bit about Qwilr, and then I want you to tell us a little bit about where we can find out more about you as well, because you're an interesting guy, and I think a bit of context for the audience, if they want to know more, is always interesting.
Sure. Look, in regards to Qwilr, I mean, sort of very, very relevant to this is it's basically a tool to create like really stunning sales proposals and presentations. So you can look fantastic, but you need zero design skills to use it. In fact, it happens very invisibly. Keeps everything consistent. And it could also let you use, all the modern media of the web. So if you've got videos, if you've got, interactive charts, whatever you like, you can sort of embed it there. And there's a quoting tool built in, so you can do pricing, and it connects to all your systems. So if you live in Salesforce or Pipedrive or what have you, this tool connects to those tools and sort of makes documents a living part of your sales cycle. I won't say too much. I highly recommend you guys go check it out. It came, totally from my own pain as a salesperson representing myself as a consultant and just trying to deal with big fish, multinationals, governments. I wanted a way to just look amazing, to try and do, I guess, what I was talking about trying to like hit people and make them excited about working with me because it looked so fantastic, as well as doing all the, the actual hard data and presenting them with the price and making it actionable. And I just wanted to do that all very quickly. And that was kind of literally the birth of Qwilr. So hopefully it lets you do all those things. And And if you want to find out anything about me, I have a website which I haven't updated in about 3 years, which is dylanbaskind.com, which is dylanbaskind.com. You can go check it out. Yeah.
Good stuff. Well, we'll link to both of them in the show notes over at salesman.red. Dylan, I want to thank you for your time today, mate. I want to thank you for being open and candid about this. Hopefully, Sales Nation, this isn't a challenge to spam Dylan's inbox, but hopefully you'll get a couple of emails that really resonate with you, that you might even do business with some of the people from the audience. And yeah, I think there's a really good insight. Having done the show, I think I'm going to do more of these. I think there's a lot to go at here. And so I appreciate you being candid with your responses and,
Sure.
sharing and being open with us. And with that, mate, I want to thank you again for your time and thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
And there we have it. Thank you, Dylan, for coming on the show. I appreciate your time, mate. Hopefully this was useful for everyone in Sales Nation who is selling to the C-suite and selling to perhaps a millennial audience of the C-suite, whether it be tech startups, whether it just be kind of fast up-and-comers coming up the corporate ladder in the bigger companies as well. There's a lot of value in this one. And I've taken a few things away from it as well. Hint, cold calling, don't bother with it if you're going after anyone that isn't kind of lower down the practitioner level. And with all that said, without further ado, I'll speak with you again on tomorrow's episode.